The cold was the first thing. Not the sharp, biting cold of a winter morning, but a deep, ancient cold that seeped into her very bones, chilling her from the inside out. It was a kind of cold that suggested vast, desolate spaces, a world where warmth had never truly existed. Then came the smell, sharp and earthy, the pungent, damp scent of pine needles, wet soil, and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet that she couldn't quite place, but instinctively recoiled from. And above it all, a single, lonely call from a crow, ripping through the oppressive silence like a jagged tear. Lisa Jackson had always been a creature of quiet routines, a meticulously organized universe built within the four walls of her small, upstate New York apartment. At 32, her life was a carefully curated tapestry of predictability. Early mornings fueled by Earl Grey tea steeped just so, late nights unwinding with reruns of forensic files, the grim realities of solved crimes, a peculiar comfort against the benign hum of her own existence. She was a graphic designer. Her days spent transforming abstract ideas into clean, symmetrical visuals, a reflection of her own preference for order. Weekends often involved solitary hikes through well-marked trails, or losing herself in the intricate patterns of a complex jigsaw puzzle. She had no grand ambitions, no dramatic past, no enemies. Lisa Jackson was, by all accounts, unremarkable, and she liked it that way. But on the night of October 12, 2015, her ordered world shattered. The cold deepened, the pine scent intensified, and the distant call grew sharper. Then, the visuals began to form, slowly, unwillingly. First, the trees. Not merely trees, but gaunt, skeletal sentinels, their branches clawing at a leaden sky. They were tall, blackened, stark against the muted light, like charred matchsticks impaled in a vast, cold, indifferent earth. The silence was thick, suffocating, broken only by the incessant drumming of rain, and the mournful whine of the wind through those desolate branches. And then, the body, it materialized at the base of one of those gnarled pines, curled in a grotesque, fetal position, frozen, pale, a man. His face was obscured, but the stillness, the utter lack of life, was unmistakable. It wasn't a dream. It felt like a memory, etched with a horrifying clarity that defied the usual haziness of sleep. Next to him, almost casually discarded, was an old, scuffed leather boot, caked in something dark and viscous. Blood. Lisa Jackson woke up screaming. The sound tore from her throat, a raw, animal cry that echoed in the pre-dawn quiet of her apartment. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum solo against a lingering phantom heartbeat from her dream. She was drenched, not just in sweat, but in the residual cold of that impossible forest. Her small, familiar bedroom felt alien, the shadows dancing with the horrific images burned into her mind. She stumbled out of bed, her legs weak, threatening to buckle beneath her. Every instinct screamed at her to dismiss it, to rationalize it away as a nightmare, a product of too many forensic files episodes. But this was different. Dreams, even bad ones, usually dissipated, fading with the morning light. This dream lingered, a vile, stubborn stain on her consciousness. She could still feel the phantom chill, still smell the damp earth and pine, still hear that solitary crow. The body, the boot, the trees, they were impossibly real. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone, her fingers numb. Dialing 911 felt surreal, a step into a reality she couldn't comprehend. Her voice, when it came, was a breathless, fractured whisper. I think a murder has happened. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was a stark contrast to her internal chaos. Where? They asked. Lisa hesitated, her mind racing, pulling up the impossibly precise details from her dream. A clearing, she choked out, surrounded by twisted, dark trees. There's a crumbled fire pit nearby. She described the pine, the angle of the body, even the distinctive scuff on the boot. The dispatcher, bless their patience, wrote it all down. But Lisa could practically hear the skepticism in the silence that followed. They didn't take it seriously. How could they? The next 2 days were an agonizing blur of anxiety. The dream refused to recede. It replayed in her mind with vivid, nauseating clarity. Every distant siren made her jump. Every news alert on her phone sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She found herself compulsively checking local news channels, scanning online forums for any mention of a discovery in the state parks. She knew, with a horrifying certainty that defied all logic, that the body was out there, that the forest was real. She tried to convince herself it was a delusion, a stress-induced hallucination. She drank more tea, watched more forensic files, desperately seeking the comfort of fictional horrors to drown out the real one festering in her mind. But the images persisted, haunting her waking hours, clinging to her like a shroud. The weight of that unwanted premonition pressed down on her, a chilling countdown to an inevitable, terrible truth. And then, 2 days later, the news broke. Hikers in Harriman State Park had made a gruesome discovery. A man's body, decomposing, slumped under a pine tree, and he was wearing that exact boot her childhood friend Jeremy Weller, someone she hadn't seen or spoken to in over 10 years. And that's when the real horror began, because the killer hadn't been found. But Lisa's fingerprints were, not on the body, not on the weapon, but on a note stuffed in the victim's pocket. A note that simply said, "I saw you die." So was Lisa psychic or guilty? Lisa Jackson, as we now know, was a creature of habit. Her days unfurled with the quiet predictability of a well-maintained clockwork. Her graphic design work, while creatively stimulating, was also a bastion of control. Lines, colors, and fonts all bent into her will, creating order from chaos. At home, her small apartment in upstate New York was a sanctuary of neatness. Every book aligned, every throw pillow plumped. Her evenings were a ritual. Dinner, a careful selection of Earl Grey, and the comforting, predictable narratives of true crime on TV. She devoured episodes of Forensic Files, finding a strange, almost therapeutic satisfaction in watching complex puzzles neatly solved, the monstrous always contained, always identified. This was her world, small, contained, safe. She had no enemies, no grand dramas, no reason for the universe to intrude upon her serene, solitary existence. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. On October 12, 2015, at precisely 3:47 a.m., that meticulously constructed routine was not just broken, it was shattered into 1,000 shards of terror. Lisa jolted awake, not with a gentle return from sleep, but with the sudden, violent force of a nightmare that refused to release its grip. She lay there rigid, soaked in a cold sweat that plastered her nightshirt to her skin. Her heart wasn't just pounding, it was a frantic, desperate drum, reverberating through her entire body, echoing the phantom heartbeat that had throbbed just beneath the surface of her dream. Every nerve ending felt hyper-aware, acutely attuned to a reality that wasn't her own. She could still feel it. The cold, a pervasive, bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of her bedroom. It was a kind of cold that suggested open spaces, ancient forests, and the stark indifference of nature. And the smell, a sharp, almost overwhelming tang of pine needles, wet earth, and a faint, cloying sweetness she couldn't identify, but which churned her stomach. Overhead, she could still hear it, distinct as if it were outside her window, the lonely, ominous call of a crow, tearing through an unnerving silence. This wasn't just a dream, it was an experience. It had entered her, consumed her, and now, even awake, it clung to her like a shroud. Most dreams, even the most vivid, begin to dissipate the moment consciousness returns, fading like smoke. But this one lingered. It was sharp, insistent. Every detail seared into her mind with an alarming clarity. Let us walk through what Lisa saw, what her subconscious mind conjured with such devastating precision. It began with the trees, not the familiar, comforting oak and maple of her local park, but something far older, far more menacing. They were gaunt, skeletal sentinels, their branches reaching, grasping claws against a sky the color of bruised plums. They were impossibly tall, unnaturally dark, like charred matchsticks driven into a vast, cold, indifferent earth. The ground beneath them was a tangle of damp, decomposing leaves and exposed roots, slick with an unceasing, almost silent rain. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on her as she moved through the spectral forest, though she felt no actual movement. It was as if she was a disembodied observer, forced to witness. Then the focus sharpened, drawn inexorably to the body. It lay at the base of one particularly gnarled, ancient pine, curled into a grotesque, fetal position. The figure was clearly a man, though his face was mercifully obscured by shadow and the angle of his head. His skin, even in the dream's muted light, appeared frozen, pale, almost translucent. There was no movement, no rise and fall of breath, only in profound, unsettling stillness. The rain seemed to beat on his still form, refusing to wash away the grim reality. And next to his outstretched leg, almost as if carefully placed, was an old, scuffed leather boot. It was distinctive, well-worn, with a deep crease across the toe and a particular tear near the laces. But what truly solidified the horror was a dark, viscous substance caked onto its side. Blood, fresh, soaking into the damp earth around it. Every detail, from the specific shade of his torn parka to the way the leaves lay undisturbed around him, was recorded with terrifying fidelity in Lisa's mind. It was as if her consciousness had been a camera, meticulously documenting a scene it had no right to know. When she finally forced herself out of bed, her legs were not her own. They buckled beneath her, the sudden rush of standing too much for her reeling senses. She clutched the dresser for support, fighting a wave of nausea. The cold that had permeated her dreams seemed to have seeped into her very bones in reality. She shivered uncontrollably, despite the warmth of her apartment. The logical part of her brain, the one that designed brochures and balanced budgets, screamed for her to dismiss it. It's just a dream, Lisa. A nightmare. Too much caffeine. Too many true crime shows. But the primal part, the one that knew fear, whispered otherwise. This was different. This was real. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the dream itself, that she had to do something. But what? Who would believe her? She tried to confide briefly in her sister Sarah, whom she called a few hours later, her voice still hoarse. "I had the most awful dream," she started, trying to sound casual, but the words caught in her throat. She described the trees, the body, vaguely, omitting the most horrifying details. Sarah, ever practical, mumbled something about indigestion and stress, advising her to take a hot bath and forget about it. Lisa hung up, feeling an isolating pang of despair. How could she convey the oppressive weight of what she had seen? With no one else to turn to, and the images refusing to leave her mind, she found herself fumbling for her phone again. This time, 911. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it. The dial tone seemed to stretch on for an eternity. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm, professional, utterly unprepared for fractured reality Lisa was about to present. I think a murder has happened, Lisa managed, her voice barely a whisper, breath catching in her throat. Ma'am, can you state your name and location? Lisa Jackson. I'm at her apartment address. But it's not here. The murder, she struggled. Try to translate the dream's haunting landscape into coherent directions. It's in a forest, a clearing. There was a pause. The dispatcher's tone shifted, a hint of polite skepticism creeping in. Ma'am, are you reporting a crime you witnessed? Can you tell me where this happened? No, I dreamt it, Lisa admitted, the words tasting like ash. I know how it sounds, but it was so real, so vivid. There's a clearing deep in the woods, surrounded by these really tall, blackened trees, like burnt matchsticks. And there's a body, a man, curled up at the base of a big pine tree. And next to him, there's an old, scuffed leather boot, and it's covered in blood. The dispatcher, to their credit, continued to ask questions, though each one felt like a small, sharp pinprick of disbelief. Can you provide any cross streets? Any landmarks? A park name, perhaps? Lisa racked her brain, pulling from the terrifying mental map the dream had imprinted. There was a crumbled fire pit nearby, and the trees, they were kind of twisted. The ground was wet, muddy. I could smell the pine and something else. She described the specific posture of the body, the tear in the boot. She was a witness, describing a scene, but her source was impossible. All right, Ms. Jackson, the dispatcher finally said, her voice betraying a sigh she quickly stifled. We've logged your call. We'll send someone to check out the general area you described in the state parks. But please understand, without a more precise location or evidence, this will be difficult to follow up on. They didn't take it seriously. They were polite, professional, but the message was clear. This was a call from a disturbed individual, not a credible witness. Lisa hung up, the silence of her apartment suddenly deafening. She felt a profound wave of exhaustion wash over her, coupled with a searing embarrassment. She had sounded unhinged. She knew it, yet underneath the humiliation, the dread only deepened. The dream didn't feel like a delusion. It felt like a warning. The next 2 days became an unbearable waiting game. Lisa couldn't eat, couldn't focus. Her graphic design projects sat untouched on her desktop. Sleep offered no escape. She drifted into fitful, anxious naps, only to be jolted awake by the lingering phantom chill and the imagined call to crow. She found herself obsessively checking news sites, refreshing local police blotters, scanning missing persons reports, her heart leaping into her throat at every new headline. Was it today? Had they found him? Had her impossible vision become a horrific reality? Every siren wailing in the distance, every flash of police lights she glimpsed from her window, sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She found herself staring out at the trees behind her apartment building, half expecting to see those blackened, skeletal forms rise up from the familiar landscape. The sense of an impending, unavoidable catastrophe hung over her like a suffocating blanket. She had given them the details. She had given them a warning. But who would heed the warning of a nightmare? The television, usually a source of comfort, became a tormentor. She flicked past channels, her gaze involuntarily drawn to news reports, searching for any image, any word that would confirm her terror or mercifully disprove it. She desperately wanted it to be nothing, just a dream, a bizarre, intense dream, but nothing more. Yet the conviction remained, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. The body was out there. The boot was real. The specific, haunting details were too precise to be random. She drank cup after cup of tea, the warmth doing little to penetrate the deep chill that had settled within her. She tried to read, but the words blurred, her mind replaying the gruesome scene. She paced her small living room, wearing a path in the carpet, a prisoner of her own subconscious. The weight of the premonition, unshared and unheeded, grew heavier with each passing hour. It wasn't just dread she felt. It was a burgeoning sense of helplessness, of being a pawn in a game she didn't understand, witnessing a tragedy she couldn't prevent, only anticipate. And then, 2 days later, the news broke, and it broke Lisa. For 2 agonizing days, Lisa had been a prisoner of her own mind, haunted by a vision she couldn't escape and a dread she couldn't alleviate. But the wait, mercifully or cruelly, was about to end. Life, in its grim indifference, continued its course for everyone else. And in a remote, densely wooded section of Harriman State Park, approximately 50 miles north of Lisa's quiet upstate apartment, that grim reality was about to surface. The morning of October 14th, 2015, dawned with a crisp, autumnal chill. The air carried the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a typical fall day. 2 avid hikers, a couple named Mark and Brenda, were enjoying their routine trek along a less-traveled path. They were experienced outdoors enthusiasts, accustomed to the solitude and rugged beauty of the park. Mark, a retired park ranger, often pointed out interesting flora or animal tracks to Brenda, who was an amateur photographer. Their conversation was light, punctuated by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional chirping of a hidden bird. As they ventured deeper, Brenda paused, framing a shot of a particularly vibrant patch of crimson sumac. Mark, a few paces ahead, veered slightly off the path, drawn by a movement in the undergrowth. He thought it might be a deer, but what he found wasn't a graceful animal. It was a still, slumped form at the base of a weather-beaten pine tree, shrouded partly by low-hanging branches and overgrown ferns. "Brenda," he called, his voice suddenly taut, all casualness gone. "Stay back." Brenda sensed the shift immediately. She lowered her camera, her brow furrowed. Mark approached cautiously, his years of experience telling him something was profoundly wrong. The scent that reached him was not the pleasant decay of autumn, but something far more sickening, something thick and metallic that caused a primal recoil. As he peered closer, pushing aside a curtain of wet leaves, the form resolved itself into the unmistakable shape of a human body. It was a man, curled in an unnatural, almost fetal position, as if he had collapsed there, utterly alone. His clothing, a torn, mud-caked parka, offered little protection against the elements, and indeed, against the relentless advance of time. The decomposition was evident, a grim testament to the 2 days he had lain there undisturbed. His skin was mottled, discolored, a sickly gray-blue where it was visible. His face was turned away, obscured by a tangled mass of dark hair and shadow, a small mercy to the hikers. Mark's gaze swept over the scene, his ranger's training kicking in even as his stomach churned. He noted the undisturbed leaves around the body, suggesting he hadn't struggled. He noticed the curious detail of one missing boot, and then his eyes fell upon it. Lying just beside the man's outstretched, rigid leg, nestled among the damp leaves, was an old, scuffed leather boot. It was distinctive, well-worn, with a deep crease across the toe and a particular tear near the laces. It was a twin, undoubtedly, to the one still on the victim's foot. Brenda, despite Mark's warning, had edged closer, her own eyes widening in horror as she processed the scene. "Oh, God, Mark," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Is he?" Mark nodded grimly, already reaching for his phone. "He's gone. Call 911. Tell them we have a body. In Harriman off the North Trail, near the old stone wall." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he held his partner back, shielding her from the full impact of the gruesome discovery. Within minutes, it seemed, the quiet solitude of Harriman State Park was shattered. The distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder, cutting through the natural sounds of the forest. First, a patrol car, then a forensics van, followed by an ambulance, though the latter was merely a formality. Uniformed officers quickly established a perimeter, stringing up bright yellow crime scene tape that starkly contrasted with the muted greens and browns of the woods. Detectives in plain clothes arrived, their faces grim, their movements precise. The initial investigation began immediately. Crime scene technicians, moving with practiced efficiency, began their meticulous work. Cameras flashed, documenting every angle, every detail before anything was disturbed. The air, already thick with the scent of pine and decay, now carried the sterile tang of latex gloves and disinfectant. The body was carefully examined, notes taken, preliminary observations made. The challenges were immediately apparent. The victim had no identification, no wallet, no driver's license, no keys, nothing that could immediately tell them who he was. This was a classic John Doe scenario, complicating the early stages of the investigation. They would have to rely on dental records, fingerprints, if any were on file, or eventually public appeals for recognition. The cause of death was not immediately obvious. Those signs pointed to blunt force trauma or a struggle. Then, as the crime scene technician carefully went to the victim's pockets, they found it, tucked deep inside the inner lining of his torn jacket, almost as if deliberately hidden, was a folded piece of paper. It was a single ordinary sheet, torn unevenly, and the words written on it were in smudged black ink. The detective on scene, a seasoned veteran named Miller, took the note, his brow furrowed. He unfolded it carefully. His eyes scanned the simple, stark message. "I saw you die." Miller's partner, Detective Rodriguez, leaned in, reading over his shoulder. "What do you make of that?" she asked, her voice low. Miller ran a thumb over the smudged ink. Could be a taunt. Killer letting us know he was present, watching. Or could be a confession, someone trying to unburden themselves without fully admitting it. He paused, his gaze lingering on the crude handwriting. Either way, it's damn unusual. No one leaves a note like that unless they want to be found, or they want to make a statement. The note immediately became the centerpiece of their early theories. Was it from the killer? A witness? A message left by the victim himself? Perhaps, in a final desperate act? The sheer ambiguity was unsettling. Back in her small apartment, a week after the 911 call, Lisa Jackson was slowly going mad. The dream had not faded. It had, if anything, grown sharper, more insistent, a constant, chilling hum beneath the surface of her waking hours. The television, usually a source of comfort, had become a source of profound anxiety. She watched the local news channels religiously, compulsively. Every crime segment, every mention of Harriman State Park, sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. She was desperately searching for confirmation, for anything that would either validate her terror or finally, mercifully, prove it to be just a figment of her imagination. She was in her living room, clutching a cold mug of tea, the news playing softly in the background. She was half listening, half lost in her own frantic thoughts, when a local reporter's voice cut through her reverie. Sources confirmed that a body found last week in Harriman State Park has yet to be identified. Police are appealing to the public for any information regarding a male victim, estimated to be in his early to mid-30s, found deceased at the base of a pine tree. Lisa froze, her breath hitched in her throat. The victim was wearing a torn parka and was missing one boot. Authorities have also confirmed the discovery of a mysterious note found on the victim's person. Then they showed it, not the body, but a blurry black and white image of the crime scene, taken from a distance. The pine tree, the clearing, the crumpled fire pit, partially visible through the dense foliage, and though pixelated, the unmistakable image of a single old, scuffed leather boot lying in the leaves. Lisa's tea mug clattered to the floor, shattering porcelain and spilling cold liquid across the rug. A wave of nausea, cold and profound, washed over her. The room spun, the image on the screen, the reporter's voice, her own remembered dread. It all crashed together in a deafening crescendo. It was all there, exactly as she had described, the very scene of her nightmare. She barely registered the sharp pain as her knees buckled, her vision tunneled, the edges of her awareness blurring into a gray haze. The last thing she knew was the cold shock of the floor against her cheek before darkness claimed her. Lisa Jackson fainted in her living room. When she came to, moments later, she lay on the floor, disoriented, the ringing in her ears slowly subsiding. The news report was still playing, now on a different story, but the images were seared into her mind. There was no denying it now. Her dream wasn't just a dream. It was a premonition. And the man, the stranger, was real. A new kind of terror settled in, not just of the murder, but of her own mind. What did this mean? Was she cursed? Was she somehow involved? The thought was absurd, monstrous. But the impossible precision of her dream, the chilling accuracy of every detail, left no room for doubt. Her first instinct was to call the police again, to tell them, to finally, fully explain everything. But the memory of the dispatcher's skepticism, her sister's dismissal, flooded back. How could she possibly convince them now? She imagined their faces, their disbelief, their immediate jump to the conclusion that she, with her uncanny knowledge, must be somehow involved. She paced for hours, a frantic, internal debate raging. Silence meant complicity, or at least suspicion. Speaking up meant sounding like a madwoman, or worse, making herself a target. The dread that had been a dull throb for 2 days now became a suffocating weight. Finally, as dawn broke on the 8th day after her dream, fueled by a desperate need to cleanse herself of this horrifying secret, and a perhaps naive hope that the truth would set her free, she picked up the phone. She dialed the local police department directly, asking to speak to someone about the Harriman State Park case. Her voice, though still trembling, was more resolute than it had been on the 911 call. "My name is Lisa Jackson," she said, bracing herself. "And I know about the body found in Harriman. I know what it looked like, because I dreamed it, days before it happened. And that, as she would soon discover, was when the real questions began, not just for the police, but for Lisa herself." The phone call from Lisa Jackson, fraught with impossible claims of dreamt prophecies, was initially met with a mixture of polite skepticism and professional obligation. Detective Miller, the lead investigator on the Harriman State Park case, had taken the call. His initial assessment was that Ms. Jackson was either severely traumatized by the news, mentally unwell, or perhaps a misguided attention seeker. Yet her uncanny accuracy about the crime scene's details not released to public, like the specific type of boot and the general location near a fire pit, nagged at him. He couldn't dismiss it outright. Not yet. He dispatched 2 junior officers to conduct a preliminary interview, a formality, he thought, before closing the book on this peculiar lead. But before those officers could even reach Lisa's apartment, a breakthrough arrived in the mundane, methodical world of forensic science. Back at the state lab, working tirelessly, the dental records team had finally found a match for the John Doe from Harriman. His full dental profile, meticulously compared against state and national databases, had pinged on a record from a routine checkup years prior. The victim had a name, Jeremy Weller, age 34. Detective Miller leaned over the fax report, a grainy image of Jeremy's driver's license photo staring back at him. He didn't recognize the face, but the name would quickly be fed into every available database. Criminal records, employment histories, social media. They needed to know who Jeremy Weller was, and why he ended up dead in Harriman State Park. What Detective Miller couldn't have known, however, was that this newly identified name, Jeremy Weller, would send a seismic shockwave through Lisa Jackson's already fractured reality. When the 2 junior officers arrived at Lisa's door, she greeted them with a desperate, almost manic urgency. She recounted her dream in agonizing detail, her voice breathless, her eyes wide with a combination of terror and a strange, almost desperate hope for vindication. They listened, their faces impassive, jotting down notes, occasionally exchanging glances. They were unconvinced, but the sheer volume of specific, unreleased information she possessed made them pause. They promised to relay her statement to Detective Miller and left, leaving Lisa feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever. The next morning, Detective Miller himself called Lisa. His tone was different now, less dismissive, more probing. He confirmed they had identified the victim, and then he said the name. His name was Jeremy Weller. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lisa felt the air leave her lungs in a sudden whoosh. Jeremy. The name was like a ghost, whispered from a forgotten corner of her past. Not just a stranger, not just the man in her dream. It was Jeremy. She found herself within hours, sitting across a cold laminate table in a small, windowless interrogation room at the local precinct. The room felt designed to maximize discomfort, to drain you of energy and secrets. Detectives Miller and Rodriguez sat opposite her, their expressions a carefully calibrated blend of weary professionalism and escalating suspicion. "Ms. Jackson," Miller began, his voice surprisingly gentle, but with an underlying steel. "You informed our officers yesterday that you dreamed the victim, 2 days before he was found. You provided very specific details about the scene, details we hadn't released." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "We've now identified the victim as Jeremy Weller. Do you know that name?" Lisa swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Yes, I knew Jeremy." A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed Detective Rodriguez's face. "How well did you know him, Miss Jackson?" And that's when the painful, almost unbelievable truth began to unravel. Lisa recounted her history with Jeremy, not just an acquaintance, but a deep, formative connection from her adolescence. "We were inseparable," she explained, her voice tinged with nostalgic sadness that quickly turned to horror. "In high school, best friends. He was my first crush, and my first heartbreak." She spoke of their shared laughter, their teenage secrets, the intense, all-consuming emotions of first love and its inevitable, painful dissolution. They had drifted apart after high school, as many do. Different colleges, different cities, different lives. There was no dramatic falling out, just a slow, quiet fading that happens when paths diverge. "But we haven't spoken in over 10 years, Lisa insisted, her voice rising with a desperate edge. "Not a call, not an email, not even a social media post. I swear, I hadn't even thought about him in years. He was just a part of my past. A good memory, but a distant one." The detectives exchanged another glance, this one less subtle. The coincidence was staggering. Of all the people in the world, of all the bodies that could appear in a precognitive dream, it was a man she had been intimately connected with, a man she hadn't given a moment's thought to in a decade. Why him? Lisa cried, her voice cracking. That's what makes it so unsettling. Why him? Why now? I don't understand. Her frustration and fear were palpable, warring with the detective's professional skepticism. Miller leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. Ms. Jackson, if you haven't seen or spoken to Mr. Weller in 10 years, how do you account for this dream? How would his image, his death, suddenly manifest in your mind with such detail? Lisa wrung her hands, searching for answers she didn't possess. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It just happened. It felt so real. It felt like I was there. But I wasn't. I couldn't have been. The interview continued for hours, a relentless, polite but firm interrogation. They moved from her relationship with Jeremy to her daily routine, her habits, her recent whereabouts. Had she traveled recently? Did she have any enemies? Did she know anyone who knew Jeremy now? Every answer she gave, no matter how innocent, seemed to be met with a skeptical glance or a follow-up question that twisted her words. Her initial hope of being a credible witness was quickly evaporating, replaced by the chilling realization that she was becoming something far more sinister in their eyes. Then came the moment that truly broke her. Detective Rodriguez placed a folder on the table. Ms. Jackson, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, we need you to confirm some details. We're going to show you some crime scene photographs. Lisa recoiled instinctively. No, she whispered. Please, no. I've already seen it. In my dream. I don't need to see them again. But the detectives were unyielding. It's important, Ms. Jackson, for verification. Miller slid a few glossy prints across the table. They were stark, unflinching images of the scene. The wide shot showing the dark, twisted trees, exactly as she had described. A closer shot of the pine tree, its bark rough, its branches reaching like skeletal arms. And then the image that stole her breath, Jeremy's body, though blurred, in that same grotesque curled posture, the tattered parka, and then a close-up of the scuffed leather boot, lie in the damp leaves, the telltale tear near the laces, the dark, undeniable stain of blood. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy and suffocating. The cold from her dream, the smell of pine and something else, rushed back with overwhelming force. She stared at the photographs, her gaze fixed on the boot, then on the slumped form. This wasn't a nightmare now. This was real. Jeremy, her childhood friend, lying there, dead. A guttural sob tore from her throat. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless, mixing with the cold sweat that beaded on her forehead. She covered her mouth with a trembling hand, trying to stifle the sounds, but they escaped, raw and painful. Oh, God, she choked out, her voice barely recognizable. It's real. It's all real. She began to shake uncontrollably, her body racked with profound, visceral anguish. This wasn't just grief for Jeremy. It was a horror that went deeper, a psychological violation. I feel contaminated, she sobbed, clutching her arms around herself, as if trying to shed an invisible shroud. Like the dream, it used me, it violated me. It brought this into my mind. I didn't want to see this. I didn't want to know. Her words were barely coherent, a desperate plea for understanding amidst her breakdown. The detectives watched her, their expressions now hardened. Her emotional display, while undeniably genuine, also fit a pattern they had seen countless times. The suspect overwhelmed by the weight of their own actions. They weren't looking at a psychic anymore. They weren't seeing a traumatized witness. They were seeing a person who knew too much, reacted too strongly, and had a mysterious, inexplicable connection to the victim. Detective Miller cleared his throat, his voice now devoid of any pretense of gentleness. Ms. Jackson, he stated, his voice flat, you're telling us you dreamt about this exact crime scene with this victim, a man you knew before it happened, and you had no contact with him for 10 years. Is that correct? Lisa could only nod, tears still streaming, her body trembling. And you have no explanation for how or why this information came to you? No, she whispered, shaking her head. I wish I did. I wish I never saw it. The detectives exchanged a final, significant glance. For them, the dream was no longer just a bizarre coincidence. It was a potential cover story. Her impossible knowledge, her emotional breakdown, her undeniable connection to the victim. It all began to paint a very different picture. The questioning continued, relentlessly. They now moved into the details of her life that could, in any way, connect her to Jeremy Weller in the present. Her finances, her relationships, any recent conflicts. Every answer she gave was recorded, cross-referenced, and filed away as they systematically built their case. Lisa Jackson was no longer merely a potential witness. She was now their prime suspect. The note, a simple, torn piece of paper, crudely written, I saw you die. From the moment it was discovered in Jeremy Weller's pocket, it had been a central, unsettling enigma in the case. Who wrote it? Was it a killer's taunt, a witness's desperate message, or something else entirely? Now, with Lisa Jackson's improbable story and her past connection to the victim, its significance intensified. The detectives, Miller and Rodriguez, knew it had to be processed with the utmost care. This was potential physical evidence, perhaps the only tangible link to the perpetrator, or, as their suspicions now heavily leaned, to Lisa herself. Back at the forensic lab, under the harsh glare of specialized lights, a skilled technician meticulously prepared the note for analysis. Every surface was treated with the delicate precision of an archaeological dig. First, the visual inspection under magnification, searching for any fibers, hairs, or other trace evidence. Then, the careful application of various powders and chemical agents designed to react with the amino acids and oils left behind by human skin. The process was slow, painstaking. Each brushstroke, each spray, was performed with the knowledge that a single careless move could destroy crucial evidence. The air in the lab was thick with anticipation. Days had passed since the discovery, and the pressure was mounting. Then, a faint smear began to emerge. A pattern. Gradually, piece by painstaking piece, a clear, albeit partial, print solidified on the paper's surface. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The technicians carefully lifted and photographed it, creating a digital image that was then fed into the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS. The database hummed, comparing the partial print against millions of store records. Moments felt like an eternity. The tension in the lab was palpable. Then, a match. A single, distinct hit. The system displayed the corresponding record. The print belonged to a Lisa Jackson, her index finger. The news hit detectives Miller and Rodriguez like a physical blow. They had suspected her, yes, but this was concrete. This was physical evidence, unassailable proof linking Lisa directly to the crime scene, to the victim, and most damningly, to the cryptic note found on his body. The theory of her as a traumatized witness or mentally unstable individual evaporated. This was no longer about a strange dream. This was about a deliberate act. The investigation had just taken a dramatic, undeniable turn. When Miller and Rodriguez next faced Lisa in the interrogation room, their demeanor was markedly different. Gone was a cautious, probing tone. It was replaced by a cold, unwavering certainty. Miller laid the lab report and a magnified image of the fingerprint match on the table, sliding them across to her. Ms. Jackson, he stated, his voice flat, we processed a note found on Jeremy Weller's body. He pointed to the magnified fingerprint. This print, an index finger. It's yours. It's a match. Lisa stared at the image, then at the report, then back at the detectives. Her eyes widened, her jaw slackening in stunned disbelief. What? No, that's impossible. Her voice was a ragged whisper, then rose in a desperate plea. I've never seen that note. Never touched it. I swear to God, I've never seen it before in my life. Her reaction was genuine, a raw outburst of shock and utter bewilderment. She began to hyperventilate, shaking her head frantically. How? How can that be? I don't understand. This is insane. For the detectives, her denial was typical. Every suspect denied. But for Lisa, it It was a terrifying, unfathomable reality. How could her fingerprint be on something she'd never touched? Her mind raced, grasping for any explanation, however outlandish. "My only theory," she stammered, looking from one detective to the other, her eyes pleading for them to believe her, that I wrote it in the dream, that my hand, in the dream, somehow wrote it. Miller scoffed, a short, sharp sound of dismissal. "Ms. Jackson, fingerprints aren't left in dreams. They're left in reality. This print places you definitively at the scene, touching that note which was found in the victim's pocket. This is no longer a question of whether you dreamed it. This is a question of how you got there." Rodriguez picked up the thread, her voice like ice, because the single most crucial piece of information you provided, the precise location of the body in the vastness of Harriman State Park, remains unexplained. You insisted it was all from your dream, but that dream description was perfectly accurate. So, Ms. Jackson, tell us again, how did you really know where the body was? Lisa was trapped. She repeated her desperate plea, her voice becoming hoarse. "It was the dream. I swear, I woke up with the image, the location, seared into my mind. I've never been to that part Harriman, not in my waking life. I don't hike there. I don't even know that section of the park." But the detectives were no longer listening to her pleas. They had their physical evidence. Now, they would use technology to corroborate. Miller nodded to Rodriguez, who pulled out a tablet. "We have reason to believe, Ms. Jackson, that your memory of your movements might be incomplete," Rodriguez stated, her gaze fixed on Lisa. "Modern cell phones are constantly pinging off cell towers, even when you're not making a call. They create a digital breadcrumb trail of your exact movements." She began to scroll through data on the tablet. "We pulled your phone tower data for the days leading up to the discovery of Jeremy Weller's body." The screen displayed a complex map with lines and dots illuminating Lisa's past movements. "On October 10th, Ms. Jackson, 2 full days before your alleged dream, your phone registered a series of pings. Not near your apartment, not near your usual hiking trails, but deep within Harriman State Park. Specifically, in the vicinity of the section where Jeremy Weller's body was later found." The map on the screen displayed a cluster of green dots, indicating strong signals from cell towers in that remote area, dated October 10th, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. These were not just distant pings. These were clear indications of her phone, and presumably her, being physically present in that precise, desolate section of the park. The revelation was a hammer blow. Lisa stared at the map, then at the cold, unyielding faces of the detectives. She felt a profound, chilling disconnect from herself. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, the last vestiges of her composure crumbling. That's impossible. I have no memory of being there. None. I would remember something like that." Her voice was now a fragile thread, barely holding itself together. "I swear I was home. I was watching TV. I was in bed." The weight of this new, irrefutable evidence was crushing. Her fingerprint on the note, her phone, confirming her physical presence at the crime scene hours before the dream, 2 days before the discovery. How could she reconcile this with her absolute lack of memory? Her mind, already strained to its breaking point by the horror of the dream and the identity of the victim, now threatened to splinter entirely. "Ms. Jackson," Miller's voice cut through a growing panic, sharp and accusatory. "The evidence indicates otherwise. Your fingerprint is on a note found on the victim, and your phone places you at the scene, exactly where you later dreamt the body was hours before you supposedly had that dream. The question is no longer if you were there. It's what you were doing there, and why you're pretending you don't remember." Lisa's repeated insistence of no memory was now interpreted as evasion, a deliberate attempt to mislead. She could feel herself slipping, the logical argument she tried to construct dissolving into a desperate, inarticulate babble. Was she going insane? Had she truly repressed such a terrifying event? Could she have been there without knowing it? The idea was monstrous, yet the evidence against her was now overwhelming, physical, undeniable. The detectives watched her, their silence heavy, allowing the crushing weight of the revelations to settle upon her. "Lisa Jackson, the woman who dreamt the crime scene, was no longer just a curious anomaly. She was now, undeniably, inextricably, the prime suspect in the murder of Jeremy Weller, and her impossible dream was beginning to look less like a premonition and more like a carefully constructed, elaborate lie. The weight of the fingerprint and the phone tower data had been crushing. Lisa Jackson sat across from Detectives Miller and Rodriguez, a broken figure. Her fervent denials of being a Harriman Park fell hollow even to her own ears, drowned out by the undeniable, damning evidence. She was crying now, not just tears of fear, but profound confusion, a desperate plea for an explanation to a mystery that was becoming inextricably tied to her own consciousness. The detectives watched her, their expressions grim. For them, it was clear they had their killer. The dream was merely an elaborate alibi. But then, an unexpected phone call came through to Detective Miller's desk. It was from Lisa's older sister, Sarah, the same sister Lisa had desperately tried to confide in days earlier. Sarah had seen the local news reports, caught wind of the escalating police interest in Lisa, and the vague, unsettling hints about unexplained connections to the victim. Driven by a deep-seated concern for her sister, Sarah had reached out to police, hoping to offer some context, some piece of Lisa's past that might somehow explain the inexplicable. What Sarah revealed was a bombshell, one that didn't clear Lisa's name, but instead threw the investigation into a perplexing new dimension. Lisa, she's had problems with sleepwalking, Detective, Sarah had told Miller, her voice trembling with a mix of fear for her sister and a strange, almost reluctant admission, not just sleepwalking. It was severe parasomnia when she was a teenager. It runs in the family, actually on our mother's side. Grandma used to wander out into the garden. Sarah went on to elaborate, painting a vivid picture of Lisa's disturbing episodes from her youth. One particularly terrifying incident, vividly etched in Sarah's memory, occurred during a bitter January night. Lisa, then 16, had vanished from her bed. Her frantic parents had found her hours later, long after midnight, standing barefoot in her snow-covered backyard amidst the dormant rose bushes. Her nightgown was thin, her skin blue with cold, and her arms were outstretched, her fingers splayed, as if she were reaching for something unseen, something just beyond her grasp in the icy darkness. She had been out there for an unknown amount of time, oblivious to the biting wind and the frost already forming on her exposed skin. Her parents had to gently guide her back inside, where she had collapsed back into bed, waking hours later with no memory of the terrifying nocturnal excursion, only a profound sense of exhaustion and a lingering chill in her bones that lasted for days. Another incident, equally chilling, involved Lisa, at 14, rearranging furniture in the living room in the dead of night, creating an elaborate, geometric pattern that made no sense in the morning light. She had stacked books precisely, moved heavy chairs with surprising strength, all while completely asleep when her parents asked about it. She denied any knowledge, genuinely bewildered by the rearranged room. Her sleepwalking wasn't just wandering. It was complex, purposeful actions performed in a deeply altered state of consciousness. She hasn't sleepwalked like that in years, though, Sarah explained, her voice tinged with desperate hope. Not since she moved out for college. We thought she had outgrown it, but then Sarah's voice dropped, tinged with new, unsettling worry. But lately, she's been complaining about waking up exhausted, even after a full night's sleep, like she'd run a marathon in her dreams. And then there were the small things. She found dirt under her fingernails a few times, a specific kind of dark, damp soil she couldn't explain. She just thought she'd been fidgeting with a houseplant or something. And just a few weeks ago, she told me she found pine needles in her hair after waking up. Not just one or two, but a small cluster tangled in her braids. She joked about a squirrel building a nest in her head overnight. We laughed it off. Now I don't know what to think. This new information, relayed to Miller and Rodriguez, did not simplify the case. If anything, it made it far more complex, cracking open a third, deeply unsettling possibility that lay between psychic and liar. The detectives now had two primary theories regarding Lisa Jackson's involvement in Jeremy Weller's murder. Theory 1, the fugue state killer. This was the most chilling, The sleepwalking history, especially its severe, complex nature, pointed towards a possibility of parasomnia-induced automatism, more commonly known as a fugue state. In this state, an individual performs complex, seemingly purposeful actions while in a non-conscious, dissociated state. They can travel, interact with their environment, and even commit crimes, all without conscious awareness or subsequent memory. This theory posited that, in a profound fugue state triggered by stress or an unknown catalyst, Lisa Jackson had indeed gone to Harriman State Park on the night of October 10th. Driven by some unconscious compulsion, perhaps linked to a repressed memory or unresolved feelings about Jeremy Weller, she had encountered him there. What happened next was terrifyingly plausible. A confrontation, a struggle, and in that dissociated, non-conscious state, Lisa had inflicted the fatal injury. The fingerprint on the note, the phone tower data, it all fit. And the dream was her mind, slowly, horrifyingly, catching up. It was her suppressed subconscious processing the traumatic event, feeding her details in symbolic, nightmarish form, a memory trying to break through the veil of amnesia she had constructed. This was a nightmare scenario for any investigator, a killer who genuinely had no memory of their actions. Theory 2, the calculated liar. Despite the new information, this theory still held considerable weight in the eyes of the police. While the sleepwalking history was compelling, it was also convenient. It offered a ready-made, almost too perfect explanation for her presence at the scene and her lack of memory. Perhaps Lisa was not suffering from a fugue state, but rather using her past medical history as a sophisticated alibi. She had known Jeremy Weller in high school. What if there was a deeper, more recent connection she wasn't disclosing? A secret rendezvous gone wrong? A simmering resentment that had finally boiled over? Her dramatic emotional breakdown, her initial confusion, could all have been an elaborate performance to deflect suspicion, now bolstered by a convenient family history? The dirt under fingernails and pine needles in her hair could be dismissed as details she invented or even deliberately placed to support a manufactured alibi once the victim was identified. For the police, the fingerprint remained a critical, undeniable piece of evidence, and Lisa's refusal to consciously acknowledge her presence at the park remained a huge red flag. The detectives mulled over these two stark possibilities, both unsettling in their own ways. One painted Lisa as a tragic, unwitting perpetrator, the other as a cunning, manipulative killer. Both, however, pointed directly to her guilt. But unbeknownst to Miller and Rodriguez, there was one more theory, a theory far stranger, far more outside the realm of conventional police work. A theory that didn't just challenge our understanding of forensics and psychology, but of reality itself. And it was about to come from an entirely unexpected place. Even with the new, perplexing layer of Lisa's sleepwalking history, detectives Miller and Rodriguez remained focused on their two most plausible theories. She was either an unwitting killer in a fugue state or a calculating one. Both led to the same grim conclusion regarding her guilt. But the case remained stubbornly unresolved, the pieces not quite fitting cleanly. The sheer impossibility of her dream, even if a cover, lingered like a bad taste. It was amidst this investigative stalemate that an unlikely and to some highly questionable figure emerged from the periphery. His name was Dr. Owen Roser. He was a parapsychologist, a researcher operating at the very fringes of accepted science. Dr. Roser wasn't a crackpot, precisely, but his field of study, precognitive dreaming, was considered by most to be pseudoscience. Yet, within his small, dedicated community, he was highly regarded. He held a doctorate from a reputable, albeit obscure, institute, and had published several controversial papers on spontaneous psychic phenomena. He was an independent researcher, often ridiculed by mainstream academia, but his quiet persistence and meticulous documentation of anecdotal cases had earned him a niche reputation. Dr. Roser had been following the mysterious Harriman State Park case, particularly the curious details that had leaked to the press about a woman claiming to have dreamt the crime scene. He saw in Lisa Jackson's story the distinct, unmistakable profile of what his research termed a oniric conduit, an individual who experiences vivid dreams that are not merely symbolic, but literal premonitions of future events, sometimes just moments before they unfold. These individuals, he argued, often possess a heightened sensitivity to unconscious signals or a latent ability to tap into a collective awareness of future happenings. The tragic catch was they couldn't always prevent the events they foresaw. Driven by a blend of academic curiosity and a profound belief in his controversial field, Dr. Roser reached out to the police. His request to meet with Lisa Jackson was met with significant resistance. Detective Miller, a man of hard facts and tangible evidence, scoffed at the idea of a dream expert. But the case was stagnating. Despite the strong circumstantial evidence against Lisa, something about her genuine distress, the very improbability of her story, left a nagging doubt. At Detective Rodriguez's cautious urging, "What do we have to lose, Miller? If she's lying, he might expose her. If she's not, maybe find something." They reluctantly agreed to allow Dr. Roser a supervised session with Lisa. Their first session took place not at the precinct, but in a small, neutral office at a local community center, chosen for its quiet, non-threatening atmosphere. Lisa arrived, pale and withdrawn, her apprehension palpable. She expected more accusations, more disbelief. Dr. Roser, however, was a stark contrast to the stern detectives. He was calm, empathetic, and radiated an earnest, almost scholarly curiosity. He explained his field of research, using precise, academic language, which paradoxically made her feel less like a madwoman and more like a subject of scientific inquiry. As they spoke, Lisa, slowly, haltingly, began to open up, finding a strange sense of validation in Roser's non-judgmental demeanor. She described other incidents she had always dismissed as mere coincidences or unnerving premonitions that faded with time. In 2013, she had a vivid, terrifying dream of a plane breaking apart in midair, a dream she remembered with chilling clarity despite it happening months before a widely reported regional airline crash. A few years prior, she had inexplicably called her friend Martha at a specific hour, feeling an overwhelming urge to check on her, only to learn that Martha had suffered miscarriage at that exact moment, despite having shown no prior symptoms. These were isolated events, brushed aside, but now, under Dr. Roser's patient guidance, they took on a new, terrifying significance. But this was the first time, Lisa confessed, her voice barely a whisper, that her dream had foretold a murder. Dr. Roser listened intently, his gaze unwavering. He then posed a radical suggestion. He asked Lisa to try lucid dreaming, to consciously, deliberately go back to that terrifying scene in her mind, to revisit the forest, the body, the cold, the smells, to search for anything she might have missed, any detail, any shadow that had eluded her conscious recall. It was a risky proposition, potentially re-traumatizing. But for Lisa, desperate for answers, for any explanation beyond her own insidious guilt, it was a desperate hope. What she found in that intentional journey back into the depths of her subconscious chilled Dr. Roser to his core. Dr. Owen Roser had carefully prepared for this session. It was Lisa's third meeting with him, and a palpable shift had occurred. Her initial apprehension had given way to a desperate, fragile hope. She clung to Roser's theories, not because they fully explained the nightmare, but because they offered an alternative to the crushing weight of police suspicion and her own creeping self-doubt. For Lisa, this was her last chance to prove her sanity, if not her innocence. The setting was quiet, almost sterile. Roser believed in a scientific approach, even to the paranormal. Lisa lay comfortably on a reclining couch, but her body was now a network of delicate wires and sensors. Thin electrodes were carefully placed on her scalp, connected to an EEG monitor, its screen displaying a fluctuating landscape of brainwave activity. A small clip on her finger tracked her heart rate. Every breath, every subtle physiological shift was being recorded. The room was dimly lit, designed to induce a state of deep relaxation conducive to dreaming. Roser sat nearby, observing the monitors, a notebook open in his lap. The air was still, thick with unspoken anticipation. Lisa closed her eyes, focusing on Roser's calm, measured instructions. Go back, Lisa, to the forest, to the scene. But this time, you are aware. You are lucid. Look for what you didn't see before. Listen for what you didn't hear. She drifted. The descent into sleep was swift, almost eager, as if her subconscious was ready to reveal its secrets. The EEG waves flattened, then broadened into familiar patterns of deep sleep. Her heart rate, for a long moment, remained steady, a slow, rhythmic pulse. Then, the first subtle shift, a slight tremor in the EEG readings, a shallowing of breath. Roser leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the monitors. He noted the changes, but Lisa remained outwardly still, deeply asleep. Within her dream, Lisa found herself standing again in that familiar, horrific clearing. The tall, blackened trees loomed. The perpetual rain fell, silent and cold. Jeremy's body was there, slumped against the pine, the old boot beside him. It was exactly as she remembered, a perfect, agonizing recreation of her first vision. But this time, the sense of being a passive observer began to change. She felt a glimmer of control, a nascent awareness that she was within a dream. She tried to push past the immediate horror, to force herself to look beyond the central tableau. She turned her head, slowly, deliberately, as if wading through thick water. The first dream had been all about Jeremy and her own shock. This time, her focus was sharper, searching. She strained her ears, listening beyond the constant drumming of the rain and the lonely call of the crow. And that's when she perceived the subtle difference. A faint wisp, an anomaly in the periphery of her nightmare vision. The EEG monitor suddenly spiked, a jagged peak erupting on the screen. Lisa's heart rate surged, a frantic beat that sent a jolt through the quiet room. Her body, still prone on the couch, tensed. Then, her eyes still tightly closed, she sat up suddenly, a rigid, almost puppet-like movement. Her lips parted and a strained whisper escaped, cutting through the silence of the room. There was someone else there. Roser's hand froze above his notebook. He urged her gently, his voice soft but urgent. "Who, Lisa?" "Describe them." Still lost in the depths of her dream, Lisa spoke, her words fragmented, chillingly vivid. "A figure obscured by the trees. Watching. Not Jeremy. Not me. Someone else." She seemed to be straining, trying to pull more details from the elusive shadow. They were smoking something. I could smell it, faint, mingling with the pine, and they were laughing, softly, a low, guttural sound like a chuckle. The chilling details poured out, the shadow moving through the undergrowth, the glint of something metallic, a lighter, a watch, the casual indifference of the unseen observer. It was a detail so specific, so unbidden, and so profoundly disturbing that Roser felt a shiver run down his spine. This was not something Lisa could have known or invented. The police had never, ever released any information about a potential second party at the crime scene. This was new. This was a breakthrough. Roser maintained a professional calm, but his internal intrigue was immense. He watched the EEG readings, now slowly subsiding as Lisa drifted back into a deeper sleep, exhausted by the psychic effort. He knew, instinctively, that this was crucial. He immediately picked up his phone, dialing Detective Miller. The sheer improbability of the information, delivered by a woman under investigation, yet providing a detail only the killer or an unwitting witness could possess, was undeniable. Miller, initially skeptical, listened with a growing sense of unease. He knew the department had kept the idea of a second individual or a witness under tight wraps, a detail only confirmed by subtle indicators at the crime scene that had led them nowhere. The fact that Lisa, through a lucid dream, had produced it was deeply unsettling. 2 weeks later, the seemingly unrelated pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, not through direct investigation into Jeremy's murder, but through a stroke of grim fortune. A man named Nolan Vesey was arrested on the outskirts of Albany for a particularly brutal, random assault. During his processing, a routine search of his backpack yielded some rather curious and ultimately pivotal contents. Among his possessions, police discovered a crumpled pack of Marlboro Red cigarettes, a brand known for its distinct, pungent aroma. Entangled amongst the usual clutter of a backpack was a single, torn bootlace made of thick, braided leather, identical in type to the one missing from Jeremy Weller's second boot. A background check on Nolan Vesey revealed another significant detail. He had once worked at the same large warehouse as Jeremy Weller several years prior. A brief, almost forgotten connection. Was it enough? The cigarette pack, the bootlace, the shared employment, and Lisa's dream-born revelation of a watching, smoking, laughing figure. The combined weight of these disparate clues was too much to ignore. Detective Miller, despite his earlier skepticism, had no choice. The possibility of an unknown second party at the scene, a detail Lisa had provided, now had a name, a face, and a potential motive. The police officially reopened the case into Jeremy Weller's murder. Lisa Jackson, for the first time, began to glimpse a path towards genuine exoneration. The discovery of Nolan Vesey and Lisa Jackson's chillingly accurate dream detail had irrevocably shifted the focus of the Jeremy Weller murder investigation. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly disconnected, began to fall into a more coherent, albeit still deeply unsettling, pattern. With Vesey now a prime person of interest, the police officially reopened the case, diverting resources back to a file they had, just weeks prior, considered all but closed, with Lisa as their almost certain perpetrator. Their initial inquiries into Nolan Vesey's connection to Jeremy Weller quickly revealed a shared past that went beyond mere acquaintance. Both men had worked at a large, impersonal warehouse on the outskirts of Syracuse roughly 5 years prior. It wasn't just a casual employment. Records indicated that Vesey and Weller had been on the same shift, often assigned to the same loading dock crew. Whispers among former colleagues, unearthed during the renewed investigation, suggested a simmering tension. Vesey, described as volatile and quick to anger, reportedly harbored a deep-seated resentment toward Weller. Jeremy, a more easygoing but often sarcastic personality, had apparently gotten a promotion Vesey believed he deserved. There were reports of heated arguments, a minor physical altercation broken up by a supervisor, and a pervasive sense of rivalry that never truly dissipated. Even after Weller left the company, this, the detectives believed, provided a clear, chilling motive for murder. The new police efforts were intensive. Detectives Miller and Rodriguez, now more open-minded due to bizarre turn of events, interviewed Nolan Vesey extensively. He was cagey, elusive, denying any knowledge of Jeremy Weller's death and vehemently claiming he hadn't been in Harriman State Park on October 10th. He spun elaborate alibis, easily disproven, but offered no true confession. The cigarette pack found in his backpack, confirmed by forensic analysis to be the same brand Lisa described in her dream, was a strong piece of circumstantial evidence. The torn bootlace, a perfect match to Jeremy's missing boot, was even stronger. It provided a direct, physical link to the victim's person, if not directly to the murder weapon. However, despite the compelling circumstantial evidence, the shared history, and Lisa's corroborating dream, a crucial element was missing: direct physical evidence tying Vesey to the act of murder itself. There was no DNA at the crime scene linking him to Jeremy's body, no weapon recovered, no eyewitnesses, other than Lisa's dream-born account. The unique nature of the initial investigation, focusing on Lisa, meant some critical early forensic opportunities might have been missed. Without a confession or undeniable forensic proof, the district attorney's office deemed the case against Nolan Vesey too weak. He was a deeply suspicious individual, almost certainly the killer in the detectives' minds, but he was never convicted for Jeremy Weller's murder, due to the lack of concrete physical evidence directly implicating him. The charges related to Jeremy's death could not be brought forward. He eventually served time for the unrelated assault, but walked free from the Weller case. And so, the primary question surrounding Lisa Jackson had been answered. She was no longer a suspect for Jeremy Weller's murder. Nolan Vesey's potential involvement, however unproven in court, offered a tangible alternative. Lisa was officially cleared, but the chilling ambiguity of the case, and particularly the profound mystery of the note, stubbornly remained. Lisa's fingerprint, her own index finger, undeniably rested on that piece of paper found in Jeremy's pocket. If Nolan Vesey was a killer, why was Lisa's print on a note found on his victim? Two dominant theories emerged, each more unsettling than the last. Some believe Lisa's own desperate explanation, that she had indeed dreamt it, then wrote it during a sleepwalking episode. The renewed understanding of her severe parasomnia, particularly her history of complex nocturnal automatism, lent this theory a disturbing plausibility. In this scenario, her unconscious mind, having terrifyingly foreseen the event, compelled her waking but unconscious self to document it, perhaps as a desperate, unrecognized warning to Jeremy, or a subconscious processing of the trauma. The dirt under her fingernails, the pine needles in her hair. These small, previously dismissed details from her recent life now took on a terrifying new weight, suggesting her unconscious self had indeed been out in the world, leaving behind evidence of nocturnal excursions she could not recall. However, for some within the police department, and for the public who followed the whispers of the case, a nagging suspicion persisted. There were those who still felt Lisa was never fully cleared. They argued that the sleepwalking explanation was convenient, a narrative that allowed her to escape culpability for what they still believed was a conscious act. They theorized that the case became too complicated to charge, not because she was truly innocent, but because the evidence was too convoluted, too reliant on a deeply unsettling psychological defense that would be impossible to prove or disprove in court. Perhaps she had been there. Perhaps she knew Vesey. Perhaps her dream was indeed a cover or a partially remembered, repressed memory. The official clearance felt, to some, like a reluctant concession rather than a definitive declaration of innocence. For Lisa Jackson, the official clearance was a paper-thin shield against the psychological wounds the ordeal had inflicted. The constant scrutiny, the terrifying realization of her own potentially destructive subconscious, the chilling memories of the dream. It was too much. She craved anonymity, a return to the quiet, unremarkable life she once cherished. Within months of the case's public unraveling, Lisa sold her small upstate New York apartment. She moved to a different state, choosing a city where her name wouldn't be associated with headlines. She changed her number, severing ties with almost everyone except her closest family, who were sworn to secrecy. She completely stopped speaking publicly about the case, declining all media requests, retreating entirely from the spotlight that had so cruelly illuminated her darkest fears. Her desire was simply for anonymity and peace, a desperate attempt to outrun the echoes of that impossible dream. But peace, true peace, remained elusive. The deep scar left by the experience never truly healed. The fear that it could happen again, that her mind held keys to horrors yet to unfold, never truly left her. And so, once a year, a ritual began. A silent, haunting acknowledgement of the unique burden she carried. Every autumn, as the leaves began to turn and the air grew crisp, Lisa Jackson would compose an email, a single brief message, sent to Dr. Owen Roser. He was the only one who truly understood, the only one she trusted with this most intimate, terrifying secret. The subject line was always the same, unchanging, unsettling. I dreamt something again. The implications were chilling. A new date, a new dream, a new horror potentially looming on the horizon. The case of Jeremy Weller remained officially unsolved, Nolan Vesey unconvicted. And Lisa Jackson, the woman who dreamt the crime scene, was left forever suspended between prophecy and potential complicity. Her life, forever changed by a vision she never asked for, continued under the shadow of unseen connections. Lisa Jackson had sought refuge in anonymity, in a new city and a new life, believing she could outrun the haunting shadow of Harriman State Park. Her yearly emails to Dr. Owen Roser were her only confession, her only acknowledgement that the strange gift or curse still lay dormant within her. Each subject line, I dreamt something again, was a whispered terror, a silent prayer that the new vision would remain just that, a dream, confined to the dark corners of her mind, never spilling over into brutal reality. For 2 years after the Jeremy Weller case went cold, her fears seemed to be just that, fears. But the dark threads of destiny, it seems, were not yet fully unraveled. It was in the autumn of 2017, 2 years after Jeremy Weller's body was discovered, that the tranquility of Harriman State Park was shattered once more. A group of forest preservation volunteers, meticulously clearing brush from a newly designated conservation area, stumbled upon a sight that sent a collective shiver through the local community and a cold dread through the police department. Another body. The discovery sent shockwaves of deja vu through the seasoned investigators who remembered the Weller case. The similarities were too precise, too chilling to be mere coincidence. The victim was a man, unidentified at the time of discovery, found in a remote, little-traffic section of the same forest, mere miles from where Jeremy Weller's remains had been found. He was slumped against the base of an old, gnarled oak tree, his posture eerily similar to Weller's, a grotesque, slumped repose. And, with a terrifying precision that made the blood run cold, he, too, was found with one missing boot, the other remaining on his foot. The specific make and style of the remaining boot, a brand of durable hiking footwear, was disturbingly identical to the one found near Jeremy Weller. For the police, it was a sickening echo of a nightmare they had tried to bury. The crime scene was a perverse recreation. They swarmed the area, meticulous in their efforts, desperate for any shred of evidence that had been missed before. This time, there were no suspects immediately apparent. No phone pings, no obvious links to a recent assault, no leads. And perhaps most unsettlingly, after painstaking forensic analysis, no discernible fingerprints of any kind, either on the body, the tree, or the surrounding area, indicating a killer who had learned from past mistakes, or who was meticulously careful. But then, as the body was being carefully prepared for transport, a chilling discovery was made. Tucked inside the victim's coat, precisely as it had been with Jeremy Weller, was another folded piece of paper. The paper felt familiar, the fold sharp. The investigators' hearts hammered as they carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably the same as on the note found on Jeremy Weller. The same smudged, crude black ink, the same distinct slant of the letters. It was an unnerving, undeniable connection to the first murder. But the message was different. It simply read, "She warned me. She warned me." The words hung in the sterile air of the morgue, sending a jolt of profound unease through detectives Miller and Rodriguez, who had been present for the second discovery. She warned me. It was an instant, undeniable reference to Lisa Jackson, the woman who had captivated their investigation, the woman who had claimed to dream the future. This new note was more than just a cryptic message. It was a devastatingly ambiguous twist that pulled the entire narrative of the Jeremy Weller case and Lisa's involvement into a terrifying new light. How did it change everything? The first note, "I saw you die," was easily interpreted as a killer's taunt, or even Lisa's subconscious confession. But "she warned me," this shifted the frame entirely. Did it imply that Lisa, through her dreams, was not just a conduit of future events, but an active, if unwitting, participant in a larger, darker narrative? Was Lisa's dream a warning that went unheeded? Had her subconscious, a oniric conduit, tried to warn Jeremy Weller of his impending doom, perhaps through some subtle, unrecognized form of communication in her sleepwalking state, or even through the note itself? Was the first note, "I saw you die," a desperate, subconscious plea or message from Lisa, misinterpreted by the killer, or even by Jeremy himself? And this new victim, perhaps another individual connected to Vesey, or perhaps a completely random target, understood the nature of Lisa's warning, yet failed to escape his fate? This suggests Lisa is a tragic prophet, burdened by visions she cannot control or fully understand, her efforts to prevent disaster leading only to deeper entanglement. Did the killer, Nolan Vesey, know about her dream and use it to frame her, or even as inspiration? This is a chilling possibility. Could Vesey have been aware of Lisa's unique gift, perhaps in their shared past, or from local gossip after her initial media exposure? Had he deliberately orchestrated the crime scene, even leaving the first note, knowing Lisa would be implicated by her dream? And did the second note, "She warned me," directly taunt Lisa, or even acknowledge her, perhaps suggesting he was aware of her ability and the terrifying accuracy of her visions? This transforms Lisa from a victim of circumstance into a pawn in a killer's twisted game. Could her mind have somehow manifested these events? This is the darkest, most unfathomable possibility. Dr. Roser's theories, while offering a semblance of scientific explanation, still touch upon the profound mysteries of consciousness. Could Lisa's subconscious mind, in its terrifying precognitive power, somehow influence reality? Could the sheer emotional intensity of her dreams, combined with her dissociative episodes, inadvertently draw these horrors to her, or even subtly shape their occurrence? This shifts her from an innocent bystander to a horrifying, unwitting catalyst of the very event she foresees. The questions pile up, each one more profound, more unsettling than the last. Was Lisa Jackson merely a passive recipient of future knowledge, a tragic witness to fate, or was her unique condition, her oniric conduit status, somehow intertwined with the very fabric of these unspeakable acts, drawing her into a sinister dance with destiny? What other horrors lurk in the subconscious, waiting to break into reality, propelled by forces we cannot comprehend? The case of Jeremy Weller, and now the second victim, remain officially unsolved in the conventional sense. Nolan Vesey walks free, unconvicted of murder. And somewhere out there, Lisa Jackson lives a quiet life, haunted by the chilling ritual of her yearly email, the subject line a perpetual harbinger of unknown dread. The story of the woman who dreamt the crime scene leaves us with no easy answers, only a profound sense of unease. It challenges our understanding of dreams, of memory, of guilt, and of reality itself. What do you think? Was Lisa truly a tragic seer, cursed with visions she couldn't control? Or was she, in some deep, terrifying way, complicit in the very horror she foresaw? Was her dream a warning that went unheeded? Did the killer know about her dream and use it to frame her, or even as inspiration for their macabre acts? Or could her mind have somehow, inexplicably, manifested these very events into existence? We want to hear your theories. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and consider subscribing to delve deeper into the chilling, unresolved mysteries that linger just beyond the veil of our understanding. Because sometimes the most terrifying truths are the ones we can never truly explain.